Hi, everyone, and welcome to my Twitch stream, which I'll be using today to hopefully keep you a little engaged. Now, let's get to the lecture. Hi, all, and welcome to our very next lecture on performance appraisals. Now, I'm gonna get started right away because we got a lot to cover in this video. And so we're going to talk about what performance appraisals are good for, what makes it good, what does this even have to do with IO psychology. We'll talk about, we'll briefly discuss the difference between performance appraisals and performance management. Who does performance appraisals? How do they do it? What could go wrong? Um, what can we do to stop it from going wrong? What are people doing now with respect to performance appraisals? So kind of an update, current issues type of thing. And then we'll talk about legal issues. But let's get started with, I think, a very good example of what a performance appraisal may look like.
Under strengths, you've just put accounts.
Yeah.
That's your job, though. That's just. No, Keith. I was sort of looking for your skills within your job. So, is there anything else you could have put there? No. Okay. Under weaknesses, you've put eczema. Keith. Right, you've left this section completely blank, Keith. You haven't done the Q&A.
I thought that you filled that in.
No. This is aimed at you. Look, to what extent do you believe that you have the skills and knowledge to perform your job effectively? And then you just tick one of the boxes. Not at all. To some extent. Very much so. Don't know. What would you tick?
Don't know.
Okay. Question 2. Do you feel you have received adequate training to use your computer effectively?
What are the options?
Same as they're always the same. Always the same. Not at all. To some extent. Very much so. Don't know.
Don't know.
Don't know again. Okay. Do you feel you are given the flexibility to decide how best to accomplish your goals? Do you want the options again?
Yeah.
Not at all. To some extent, always the same. Very much so. Don't know. If don't know wasn't there, what would you put?
Well, the options.
Not at all. To some extent. Very much so. Don't know.
Very much so.
Do you remember what the question was?
No.
Okay. We're going to leave that there.
Clearly, there are some issues on both the incumbent and the manager in that scenario. But let's formally define what performance appraisals are. They're a systematic review. Hopefully, you got this from the clip. A systematic review and evaluation of job performance and a provision of performance feedback. So how you're doing, and how you can be better at your job.
Yeah, what is it good for?
Great question, Jack Black. What is it good for? Why do we even have performance appraisals in the first place? So it's good for things like personnel decisions. So deciding who you're going to promote, fire, demote, or lay off. And so it's important that you accurately assess your employees' performances because if you're doing it wrong, you're promoting or transferring or firing the wrong person. And this can have unexpected implications. It could affect the feelings of your coworkers if you're doing it wrong. For example, folks gossiping on how the boss doesn't know their employees and how they promoted the wrong person and things like that. It's also good for developmental purposes. So if a performance appraisal system or performance management system, whatever floats your boat, if it's done well, it can help employees learn more about their strengths and weaknesses and importantly, how to improve upon those weaknesses. But imagine if you got feedback on something you already knew that you were awesome at. For example, imagine if I told you that you need to pay more attention to these online lectures. I know you guys are already paying an immense amount of attention right now because these lectures are so engaging. In fact, I'm pretty sure that you look like the dude in this stock footage. So it's important that all this is to say is that it's important that your performance appraisals are accurate. So it's important to do a good job at it. Lastly, performance appraisals are good for documenting organizational decisions. It helps keep track of patterns of performance over time. So if somebody's improving or not improving, you can take action um, about that. And It's also helps with legal issues, which we'll talk about later. But imagine uh, you firing a person because they had one bad performance appraisal. It's much easier to defend your actions if you have a report of their bad behavior, declining behavior across a long period of time. So that's why you need IO psychologists. So IO psychologists are designed to, or not designed, are often hired to design and implement performance appraisal systems. These IOs can actually be internal permanent hires in terms of organizations, which is neat. But performance appraisals are seemingly a one-off, right? Here's a yearly review, and here are the things that you should work on for next year. And then we move on for another 364 or 5 days. And that doesn't seem super effective, does it? This is where performance management systems come in. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. Performance management systems is a continual system for employees' development and feedback. The goals of these systems are setting let's get the laser pointer out. There we go. Setting objective goals for an incumbent's continuous coaching and feedback through multiple performance appraisals, so not just a one shot in developmental planning. And so honestly, it's used interchangeably, performance appraisal and performance management systems. Um, and we'll talk about, actually, we won't talk about, but there's going to be a debate coming up on whether or not we need performance appraisals, these one shots, anymore, or if we should just move to more performance management systems. I use them interchangeably in this lecture, and that may get confusing. I'm sorry about that. But if you ever need any clarification, just, ask. So next, we'll talk just a little bit about what makes it good, and actually, this is the only slide about what that we're talking about where we what makes it good. So whether your company using like general performance appraisals for like this one shot or performance management systems, there are a couple of things that you need to keep in mind that will make your performance appraisal good. Um, First of all, and it may be not the most intuitive thing that you would think of, is that it needs to be well received by ratings. So if your system is seen as unbiased or not fair and judging people discriminatorily, um, discriminatorily, anyways, it needs to be well received by the people who you're rating. Otherwise, the feedback that you're providing is not going to be well accepted. Uh, They also need to be based on carefully documented behaviors, things that you would get maybe from a job analysis, um, that as well as carefully documented behaviors in terms of what the employee is doing. If you're making assumptions about what people are doing and not tying those to behaviors that you found in job analyses, it's not going to be perceived as accurate. It also needs to be focused on the most important performance criteria. If you're um, talking about the minutia, it's not going to really. If you have an awesome employee and your performance appraisal system or performance management system focuses on these inconsequential things is not going to be received very well, which is we know is important, but it's also not going to improve your the worker's performance very much at all. It should include many perspectives, and we'll get to that in just a little bit in the whodunit part of this lecture. And excuse me, it also needs to be forward looking. So focused on uh, improving the employees such that it's not just you made a mistake and then you end there, right? Or you didn't do well in this aspect and it ends there. It needs to be focused more on developing the employee, which is the forward looking and focused on improvement aspects of it. But let's take a deeper dive into this many perspectives uh, in right right now.
So, who does these performance appraisals? Well, that's a good question, so I'm asking it. Well, I'm asking it to you right now. Can you think about who does these performance appraisals? I mean, what immediately comes to mind is your supervisor. But you'd be surprised how many sources you can have for performance appraisal and why it matters that you have that many sources. So let's use an illustrative case here with Michael Scott from The Office. Right, so we already talked about his supervisor, whose name I've forgotten. I haven't watched it in like, I don't know, 6, 8 months or so. But his supervisor may rate Michael on his performance as a manager, and sometimes salesman. Who else do you think would be a good rater of Michael Scott's performance? Well, somebody who probably knows the job well, right? So maybe one of his peers, one of the other branch managers, might be a good source of information of rating Michael Scott's performance. Who else witnesses Michael Scott doing his work? Well, of course, his subordinates. So Dwight Schrute might be a good source of information in evaluating the performance of Michael Scott. And there's two more. One is because Michael Scott sometimes has a customer-facing job, his clients would be a good indicator of information that some of the other sources might not be exposed to in providing him some feedback. And the last source, I mean, we've talked about just about everyone, so it's going to be really hard. Prison Mike. That's right. Michael Scott can evaluate himself. So all of these different sources here provide different information, and we call this system a 360-degree feedback system. So it involves multiple raters at various organizational levels to provide 360-degree feedback to a target employee. Used for purposes consistent with the greater employee expectation and sophisticated organizations. And usually I put this, I don't set it up like this, so I should probably delete that. But anyways, there's three important assumptions when using this system. One is that when you get multiple sources, the participants, so the ratee, is usually happier because they're involved in the process. So his coworker would get 360-degree feedback. Um, Dwight would get 360-degree feedback. Customer, not really. But because they're involved in the whole process, these employees of Thunder Mifflin will be happier. Also, when multiple raters are used, the idiosyncrasies or biases of any single rater are overcome. So, Dwight may, and we'll talk about this later, Dwight may be, severe in his ratings of Michael Scott, or lenient, depending on what kind of mood he is in. And multiple raters bring multiple perspectives for a broader, more accurate view of performance. So, Michael may be displaying some customer service skills that none of these other sources of information are exposed to. It's also, Michael Scott on paper probably thinks he's great, so he might inflate his rating. So having all of these perspectives will lead to a more accurate rating of Michael Scott as an employee.
So that begs the question, why? Do you really need 5 different ratings of every single employee? Do you? On a single employee. Does it really buy you anything at the end of the day? Well, I want you to think about this. Did you ever have like a supervisor who kind of didn't like you and you knew it, who might have been biased against you? Or maybe the same thing with a coworker. Or maybe your supervisor's not around a lot, right? So they couldn't see you perform well. Well, that's why you need these individuals to witness those sorts of behaviors. For example, I'm probably overestimating how much y'all watched or have watched The Office, but it was around season 2 when we first got to see how well Michael Scott sold paper. Um, and as a audience member, we didn't see that until that particular point in time, right? We had been through 2 seasons and hundreds of hours, technically, I guess, and we didn't see him engage in any salesmanship. But one episode, we saw him go out with Jan to land a big client, and we got to see those sorts of behaviors. That's kind of why you need multiple people. That's why I can buy you something. If there was a different perspective that only occurs every once in a while, or you may not have seen in the past. So that's why you need it. But imagine now, right? Imagine we have this whole everyone working home. I'm really terrible at multitasking. I probably shouldn't be doing this, but everyone working from home, um, this and you're teleworking, getting to if you witness less will, and like less how is behavior. that So going we to have this affect teleworking thing, individuals' and that could be a abilities problem. To perceive you doing your work?
So teleworking is creating a problem for observing behavior. Essentially, what you have is, what teleworking is, but we kind of know all it is. It's a working from home or some other location, so not in the physical place of work as where everyone else is working. Um, some research has found that telecommuting may have weak or strong positive effects on performance depending on situational characteristics. And some other research found that telecommuting was positively associated with task performance and contextual performance, additionally enhanced by positive subordinate supervisor relations. So why is this a problem? Well, when you're for performance appraisals especially, is that you basically are operating off of a more narrow communication stream, right? I'm talking to you now through you know a video, but you don't see my face. Even when we're conferencing, there's delays that interrupt communication. There's some behaviors that you really can't pick up on through these communication channels. Many people work offline. For example, if I'm doing some coding on a meta-analysis, and some of my coders work offline and then upload their information to the Google Doc, a shared Google Doc. Now, if I'm a manager in that situation, I'm evaluating their performance on the time that they spent on the Google Doc. That's incorrect, right? So the information that the manager or coworker or subordinate is receiving is different, and that could lead to some bad performance appraisals. So that's why teleworking can be problematic. So you have to think about what the solution is to this. Well, the solution may be increasing the communication channel by constant video monitoring, right? So we have things like Facebook's portal, but I doubt you want this dude just spying on you all the time, being all creepy and such. So, I mean, I know you guys don't want it. Remember when I did the accessibility survey, most of you said hell no to the kind of, watching you take an exam. You don't need that sort of performance pressure, right? Even though the Hawthorne studies may tell us it would increase your performance. But that's you have to think about violations of privacy there. So now that we've talked about who does it, let's shift for a second to talk about how performance appraisals are done. Specifically, we're going to be talking about 4 different types of rating scales: graphic rating scales, behavioral anchored rating scales, checklists, and employee comparison procedures. So first up is the graphic rating scales. Now this is one of the oldest forms and honestly one of the most effective forms used. So it consists of several traits or behaviors, and raters judge how much each particular trait the rating possesses, or where on the dimension the rating falls with respect to organizational expectations. So this is the ladder, right, where you have high, they match expectations as a 4, they exceed expectations or below expectations. These are pretty easy, but what are expectations? What is, if you don't have these anchors, right? Was 7 mean, 4 mean, or 1 mean? Even with these anchors, it's not clear what behaviors represent expectations. So the next form actually takes care of this, the behavioral anchored rating scales, and it's exactly what it sounds like, except that the scale points is exactly like graphic rating scales, except we have anchors on the scale points. So here's the process of how it's done. Well, not that process. Let's go to here we go. So SMEs, do you remember them? Subject matter experts identify and define several dimensions that are important for the job. Another group generates a series of behavioral examples using techniques like the critical incident technique. So identifying the context in which a behavior occurred, the example of the behavior, detailed example of the behavior, and the outcome of what that behavior was. And then after these kind of lists of behavioral examples are made, it gets retranslated back into like these scale points here. So rating behavior. So you have these behavioral examples, and they're rated on their effectiveness, and then you choose one of the behavioral examples. So here's a example. So 1 is poor performance, 10 is good performance, but that's not really helpful, right? So you have these anchors which are offset for some reason. I don't know why, but you have this anchor. Let's just say it's at 2 of what 2 represents. So take shortcuts around established procedures at every opportunity. So that would be an example of someone who would score 2. If that's characteristic of you, then your rater in this case would use 2. So there's a lot more information in behavioral rating skills. The problem is it takes a lot more time to do this. And money, of course. Time and money are important. A much simpler form are checklists, and it's exactly what you think it is, right? So you have potentially weighted checklists, so a series of items previously weighed on importance and or effectiveness. Items indicate desirable and undesirable behavior. Here's an example, and here are the weights provided. So does the employee do this? Check or no check. You also have forced choice checklists, which basically are exactly what it sounds, right? So a rater's like, is this like you or is this not like you? So it gives you a little bit more information, and it reduces the biases. Now there's a lot of different employee comparison procedures that you can do. You can do rank ordering. So who's the best employee? Who's the worst employee? So here's a subjective judgment of the salesman. But you really don't know the difference between 1 and 2, right? Like, is there a big difference here? Is that difference the same as the difference between 2 and 3? So you kind of lose a lot of information if you're just going by basic ratings. So those are better used, I guess, for termination decisions where there's kind of this hard cutoff that you need to make, or selection decisions. But this is performance appraisals, so you don't have any information there. Anywho, you can do paired comparisons. It becomes extremely complex as the number of ratees
Round 1.
increase.
Round
But
1.
I hope you can hear that. I don't know if you can. But you get, you rate.
Choose your side.
Is this person better than
Excellent.
this person? I don't
Choose
remember.
your side.
Oh yeah, I had all this sound here.
Excellent. Round 2.
So you, there's a couple more.
Superb. Round 3.
All right. So you pick out who's the best.
Flawless victory. Final round. Fatality.
Employee, and
Round 2.
I'm gonna guess it's Dwight again.
Superb.
All right.
Round 3.
Oh, that's a tough one, but given our rank ordering from previous,
Flawless victory.
yeah, I got them all right. Awesome. There might be
Final round.
one more round. Oh, prison Mike. Oh, this definitely goes. So the last technique we're going to be talking about is forced distribution, where you have kind of these categories of the top 2.5%, the top 13.5%, the top 34%, and then you just put people into those categories. Come on, let's move it. There we go. And then BJ Noakes, and then Andy Bernard's definitely the worst salesperson. So this can be helpful too when making decisions about more understanding of where people fall on the scale of good or bad employees. So here's I kind of highlighted some of this stuff. Well, I did highlight some of this stuff in the previous slide, but here's something that's probably more palatable to you. Right, so graphic rating scales, they're super easy to develop and use, but you have a lack of precision in the dimensions and a lack of precision in the anchors. So it's easy, but it could be inaccurate. Bars kind of takes care of some of that accuracy issues by putting behavioral anchors at each of the rating scales, and it's generally well received, but it costs a lot of time and money to create, and surprisingly, there's not a lot of evidence that's more effective than other forms like graphic rating scales. So the primary benefit here is well received by raters and ratees, and as we talked about earlier, that's important. Checklists, same benefits as graphic rating scales, stupid easy to develop and use, but rater errors such as halo, leniency, and severity are quite frequent. What are those errors? Well, we'll get to that in just a bit. And then we have all of those different employee comparison methods, which help you make more precise ratings, and it's useful for making administrative rewards on a limited basis. But they're also very time sensitive, especially those paired comparison ratings. And it's not really well received by raters because you're directly comparing people to one another. You're still, and it's interesting too because you're still comparing people on the dimensions with these other ways, but you're kind of forcing the point here and making direct comparisons. Yeah. So I've been rambling on for a little bit, and I think it's time for a lecture break. So let's do that now.
The second part of breath 2 is changing sides. This time, if you need energy, gently block the left nostril off and start breathing through the right nostril. Again, using your count as you're inhaling and exhaling. Close the eyes, allow yourself to go a little deeper. As you practice these breaths, give yourself permission to trust it. Stay as steady as you can. And now we will do the balance of the left and the right nostril. So start out with your left nostril inhaling, and now exhale through the right nostril. Inhale through the right nostril. Exhale through the left. Inhale through the right. Exhale through the left. Keep the eyes closed and eyes focused to the third eye. Keep the rhythm, the balance of your breath. Stay as steady as you can. Being challenged, breathe a little deeper or use your mantra.
All right, so we talked about, the positives, or like how it's done and who does it, but we haven't talked about what can go wrong, and a lot of stuff can go wrong.
So let's be honest here. A lot of people suck at their jobs, especially when they aren't trained to do those jobs well. So it's not a stretch to think that when you give a supervisor, a coworker, a customer, or a subordinate yourself, or even a semi-trained IO psychologist a rating form of some sort, there's a chance they're going to fuck. Uh, and so in this section, we're going to be talking about all the ways that the raters may screw up performance appraisals. It's stuck on this quest for like 15 minutes, and it's killing me.
Let's talk about rater errors. Now, normally I'd ask the class to tell me what this is. And I know you're all screaming at me, telling me exactly what it is. It's a rock. It's a weird, distorted corn puff. And some people may actually say it's a potato. And if I remove this port filter, you can clearly see. Let's see. Yes. All right. Good. It's a potato. So when we do it in class, there's always somebody who says that it's not a potato. And if we can't really accurately gauge what this potato is, then how do we expect to accurately and consistently rate what human behavior is, which is way more complex and complicated and not as intuitive, or potato, depending on your pronunciation of the word. And so rater errors are evaluating another individual's performance accurately. Oh, that's what I just said. Accurately and fairly are difficult. Errors often result from this process, and understanding these errors is important to appreciating the complexities of performance appraisal. And so the way that people make these decisions, the way that they perceive the employees, is not really within the realm of IO psychology. So we pull a little bit from cognitive psychology, because they have a lot of good information there, to tell us kind of, to inform us how people are making these decisions and consequently errors. So here's a cognitive processing model of performance appraisal. And, just to give you a big overview here, we're not going to go too deep here, but here are all at each of stage. So observing the behavior, encoding information about the behavior, storing the behavior, retrieving the behavior, and integrating information. errors can occur at each of these stages. So you may miss important behaviors, or you may misinterpret the behaviors that you see. You may mislabel these behaviors, or not label them well enough to be retrieved through storage. You may not store all relevant information, or you may store the wrong information. So as you can see, there's errors that can be made throughout this process. But let's next talk about some specific errors that some raters make. The John Hamm error. So what I want you to do is take, I'm gonna time it here. I want you to take 15 seconds and tell yourself, I guess, who John Hamm is as a person, using not your knowledge of maybe you're stalking John Hamm on the internet, but just from this picture, just tell me, or tell yourself, or whatever, who John Hamm is as a person. No, this seems like 15 seconds. Well, if you made any ratings if you did exactly what I told you to do and made assumptions about him as a person, you might be engaging in this halo or horn error. So raters' tendency to use global evaluations of a ratee to make dimension-specific ratings. It's also the rater's unwillingness to discriminate between independent dimensions of a ratee and their performance. In this case, it's an extreme example where you look at John Hamm's rugged good looks and you assume that he's also a good person. But in a more practical context, it might end up being like somebody's good at doing one aspect of the job, and so that those ratings that you kind of see them. All right, let me back up a little bit. So if you see somebody, if you have multiple exercises that you're evaluating on an employee on, so you have like exercise 1, 2, and 3. In the first one, if they do an excellent job, that may color your ratings of them in a positive light on exercise 2 or 3, regardless of how they perform. In that case, you're engaging in a halo error. Horn is the opposite. If somebody does crap at the first, they're unable to make it up later. This has a lot to do with the entity and incremental theorists approach. So basically, like if you're an entity theorist, then first impressions matter, and you're unwilling to change later on. If you're incremental, each time you witness a behavior, they're like independent. We're terrible at this. Like once we judge someone in a positive and negative light, we'll keep those. We'll keep those perceptions later on, because I think we're a little bit afraid of engaging in true halo. It's not errors, just true halo. So if somebody does well, you don't want to accidentally be more severe on them later on because you're afraid of committing a halo error. And we'll talk about why this focus on errors, especially with respect to rater training, is really detrimental to an effective training system later on in this lecture. So true halos, when they're just excellent at everything, and your ratings of them are correct. Let's go on to the next example. So the next example it's actually 3 errors. So distributional rater errors. So I want you to imagine 3 raters, and how might they rate you. So we have Kimmy, Titus, and I'm gonna forget her name, but I'm gonna keep going on. Rating you on your performance. So how might they rate you? Well, Kimmy might be engaging in something that we call leniency error. So it means that the ratings across ratees. So all the ratees that she sees during her performance appraisal session, or if she's your supervisor across all of the employees, are high. Also, the mean of the ratings is higher than the midpoint of the scale. So she's using that, like if it's on a 3 to 5 scale, she's rating everyone 4 to 5, because it's Kimmy, probably everyone gets a 5. And that's leniency, right? Everyone's doing great, and she's not discriminating between low and high performers. Same issue with Titus here. That Titus just doesn't care. It occurs when doesn't want to deal with giving someone a high rating or a low rating that may cause some sort of conflict. So everyone's in the middle of the road. That's central tendency error. And then Lillian, there we go, committing severity error. So that is when you're too harsh to ratees across the board, right? So you're only using that low end of the scale, and that's not great. So why is this a problem?
All right, finally figured out this quest. Now, the problem with these distributional errors is not only that they're not discriminating, it's that they're producing range restriction. And the issue here is that it's not a they're not making judgments on a particular um, ratee. They're this is a These errors are made because of attributes of the person. So they're making these errors across different um, individuals, and they're only using like small parts of the scale. So it's a 1 through 5 scale. Kimmy's only using 4 and 5. Titus is using the middle of the scale, maybe 3 to 4, and Lillian's using like 1 and 2. And so that's not. Imagine a scenario where, say, you're awesome, you're an awesome employee, you're doing the best on all of the objective performance standards because you're awesome, but you always work with Holden, that pretentious douchebag motherfucker who, who treats other people like trash because they hadn't heard of Elliott Smith, Bon Iver, or his favorite band, the Salingers. So imagine what you might feel if Holden got the same performance ratings that you did, because the rater in this case is doing some sort of leniency error. How would that make you feel? Or on the converse, you're a terrible employee and you got some pretty good performance evaluations. Would that motivate you to work harder? No, probably not. And hence, these sorts of distributional errors can have these unintended consequences for employee motivation. But that's a topic for another day.
There's also a few more errors that I think we should discuss. Recency error. You probably learned a little bit about recency effects in cognitive psych if you've taken that. But basically, recency error is when raters heavily weigh the most recent interactions, and not previous earlier ones. But also, there's first impression or primacy effect. So this is the opposite of recency. So they weigh the earlier interactions more heavily than the later ones. There's also the similar to me error, which is basically I'm going to give more favorable ratings to people who reflect almost any of my characteristics, right? It could be demographic characteristics, it could be value systems, and that could result in some errors. So that leads us. We have all of these errors that we've talked about, but that leads us to the question of how do we stop it, right? So how do we stop these individuals from committing these errors? Well, there's some approaches. Some are more effective than others. I have a clip here with Bob Newhart providing some feedback to a rater that may help them improve their ratings later on. So let's cut to that.
All right, well, let's go, Catherine. I'm going to say two words to you right now. I want you to listen to them very, very carefully. Then I want you to take them out of the office with you and incorporate them into your life.
Well, shall I write them down?
Well, if it makes you comfortable, it's just two words. We find most people can remember them.
Okay.
You ready?
Yes.
Okay, here they are.
Stop it!
I'm sorry?
Stop it!
Stop it?
Yes, S-T-O-P, new word, I-T.
So, what are you saying?
You know, it's funny. I say two simple words, and I cannot tell you the amount of people who say exactly the same thing you're saying. I mean, this is not Yiddish, Catherine. This is English.
Stop it!
Yeah, so that may not work. What if Yoda says it in the form of a song?
Stop it now.
Yeah, whatever. You're sort of pitchy.
Didn't like it?
Listen, man, I'm not your friend.
Don't fall asleep.
Fall asleep.
Yeah, that's still not working. So let's focus more on training. So there's two types of training that we're really going to focus on here: rater error training and frame of reference training. So rater error training is exactly what do you think it is? You know, you tell the raters what sort of errors that they're making and how to avoid them. So overall, research has showed that this reduces errors, but not necessarily accuracy, right? Because it's not the focus of this type of training. You're not telling them how to properly evaluate behaviors, but just how to double check their own biases. So you're probably going to be reducing errors, but not necessarily improving the accuracy of rating. So frame of reference training is the way to go. The book says that it's promising, but this book was written a while ago, and it's really, the way to go. So frame of reference training gives them a specific, frame of reference for defining performance levels that's consistent across raters, kind of like behavioral anchored rating. So what behaviors look like a high level, so a 5 on a scale, a 3, a 1. It's all about calibrating their frame of reference. So it not only improves accuracy or reduces errors, but it also improves accuracy, especially when it's combined with behavioral observation training. So that's again exactly what it sounds like. Actually observing the employees' behaviors.
It's important to realize that raters are people too, right? They have varying different personality characteristics that impact how accurate they are with their um, ratings. And they also have various motivations, right? So there may be a supervisor who's motivated by giving all their subordinates good ratings because they don't want to look bad. Hence, it's important that raters are accountable towards goals of accuracy. So research finds when raters are held accountable for things like accuracy, their ratings are more in line with uh, those goals at the end of the day. As if accuracy isn't a clearly communicated goal that the rater should achieve, they're more likely to make ratings in line with their personal biases. Further, there are some folks who are more sensitive to when you provide accuracy. So people, raters, when they have higher conscientiousness, are going to be more accurate when you're providing goals of accuracy than those who are not conscientious. So if you haven't noticed, everything up until now focuses on things like, improving rater accuracy or the rating forms themselves. But researchers began to realize that the social psychological context drastically affect the effectiveness of performance appraisal systems. And with that in mind, we're going to turn our attention to some of those factors within this context. And first up are rater reaction criteria.
So now we have reaction criteria, right? So the role of the rater and the ratee reactions in performance appraisal process. Now the research suggests that reactions are usually better indicators of the overall viability of an appraisal system than narrow psychometric indices such as leniency or halo. If the system is not supported / accepted by the employees, its effectiveness will ultimately be limited. This research is important as it suggests that organizations and supervisors can do things to increase the likelihood that that employees will respond favorably to the performance appraisal system. So reaction criteria also comes into play when talking about the feedback that individuals receive. So emotional reactions to feedback play a significant role in determining future goals. So if you have a bad reaction to the feedback that you're getting, then the next goals that you set for yourself will be affected by the emotional reaction that you have. An employee's reaction to their feedback may be influenced by the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is a cognitive bias that suggests some unskilled individuals overestimate their abilities and do not have the metacognitive skills to realize that they're doing this. So when you tell them that they're doing something wrong or there's something that they need to improve on, they'll insist that they're right. So a little bit of self-reflection in your employees or even your ratees or raters is usually good to have. Otherwise, if they're not interpreting the feedback, and so it's not going to be effective. There's a construct within the literature called emotional intelligence, which deals with the individual's ability to effectively deal with his or her emotions and also recognize emotions in others. So people who are low in it actually tend to overestimate how good at that they are at it, based upon the with the Dunning-Kruger effect in mind. And so people who are able to recognize that they're flawed and have the emotional capacity to deal with this information are usually better employed. They're more likely to take feedback, and if they have the ability, they'll most likely improve. Now, let's next talk about supervisor subordinate relations. Do you think it matters when making performance appraisals? Well, let's take a look at this clip from The Office and see if you think it matters with how Jim and Dwight's behavior are interpreted based upon their relationship with Michael.
Hey, how's it going? So this clip often gets like copyright hit, so I'm recording this just in case it does again. It's the office scene with Bill Buttlicker, and yeah, if there's no clip right after this, you can click up here wherever it's going to be. But if there is a clip, enjoy the clip. Okay.
Yeah. it matters a little bit. So how good of a relationship that you have with the subordinate, or if you're the subordinate with your leader, matters in these performance appraisal systems. So generally, though, all right, 2 steps back, or 1 step back, maybe half a step back. This relationship is usually framed within leader-member exchange theory. So that is basically what I just said, that leadership is not necessarily based, and we'll talk about this, oh gosh, that's like chapter 13, but we'll talk about this later on. But the theory is more about leadership is based upon relationships with people rather than, say, characteristics of the leader, which is what traditional leadership theories focus on. Either the characteristics of the leader or the behaviors that they engage in. Leader-member exchange theory is different, as it focuses on the relationships. So that's a tangent, but that's just to say that the relationships between subordinate and supervisor matter to performance appraisal, but the research is a little bit limited. So one way you can think about this is if that you have a good relationship with your supervisor, they're more likely to be spending time around you. And that affects their ability to rate your performance. So not even the biases, but their ability to rate your performance because you're around them more often. So the quality of the LMX relationships affect performance appraisal satisfaction too, through its effect on procedural justice. So if you say have a bad relationship, you may not think that the procedures that the performance appraisal process goes through are fair. So if subordinates have, but on the contrast, if subordinates have a positive relationship with their supervisor, they tended to perceive that they were being treated more fairly, and this was reflected in more favorable evaluations of the performance appraisal system as a whole. That seems very political, which brings us to our next topic: organizational politics. So organizational politics are deliberate attempts by the individual to enhance or protect their self-interests when conflicting courses of action are possible. Executives intentionally manipulate performance appraisal for political reasons, as we talked about a little bit earlier. They may not want to look bad or want to make certain people look bad. Subordinates also use impression management to bring about favorable ratings. You don't want to tell your boss that they suck, but also if say you have some sort of reward system based upon what the ratings they get in performance appraisal, you may rate your fellow subordinates lower because you just want to get that reward for yourself. Kind of like what people did while we did our debates, right? Where you voted for yourself and not the other person. Sort of like that. So employees' perception of politics at work tend to create stress and anxiety, which impact work attitudes and results in performance decrements, but not necessarily always. Someone has their own self-interest in mind may their goals may be in line with organizational success, and that's when organizational politics can be good and effective, but usually not. They usually suck and can have deleterious effects on the performance appraisal system by decreasing the accuracy, as these examples provide. Trust and justice are two additional topics that performance appraisal researchers are looking into now. So trust is the extent to which raters believe that fair and accurate appraisals will be made by the organization. And if raters have limited trust in the performance appraisal process, or when they have greater discomfort with the performance appraisal process, they're more lenient in their ratings. So if they don't have any trust in the system, they're not going to try and create accurate ratings. In fact, they'll probably engage in some leniency error, and that leads to range restriction, which is not beneficial to the goals of a performance appraisal system. Raters can be trained to be more comfortable when doing performance appraisal, which can result in less leniency, but also more accuracy. There's also justice. So if raters or ratees see the performance appraisal process, the sort of process of it is unfair or biased, the psychometric quality will be irrelevant. Basically, it doesn't matter how good your system is if the people involved with it perceive it to be unfair. This is tied to a theory called implicit person theory. So the extent to which an individual believes that people can change impacts their performance appraisal. So supervisors who tend to believe that people can change are perceived by subordinates as more just in their appraisals. So we talked about this a little bit earlier with the entity theorist and the incremental theorist. So entity theorist believes that, I see one performance thing or performance episode, I can judge the rest, or it'll influence. Like, people's not going to change. If you suck at one thing, you're going to suck at everything. While incremental theorists are those who believe that performance can change over time. And so when you have a more accurate perception of how behavior actually works, people can be bad at good one thing and then improve over time, or they could be bad at one thing and good at another thing, then the performance appraisal system is more perceived as more just. And justice perceptions also lead to more frequent organizational citizenship behaviors and greater commitment to the organization as a whole. So it's important that your performance appraisal system is perceived as, is just, and also perceived as such. Participation also plays a large role here in performance appraisal systems. So this can include self-assessment or expressing ideas during the appraisal session review. There's a strong positive relationship between employee participation in the appraisal process and employees' reaction to the appraisal. So there's this meta-analysis that's pretty old now that suggests that employees' participation in the performance appraisal process positively relates to satisfaction with it, motivation to improve, belief in the fairness, and belief in the usefulness. All of this is good, but I want you to think about something real quick. This is just participation, right? So if I'm involved in some way, then I think it's more, I'm happier with it, I'm motivated to improve, I think it's fair and useful. It doesn't say that your voice was heard or your everything was integrated. Like your viewpoint, your viewpoints and feedback were integrated into how performance appraisals were done. No, it's just that you feel like you've participated in it, and that's an important distinction here. So employees are not necessarily by participating aren't manipulating the performance appraisal system in meaningful ways, but being involved in the decision-making process is simply leads to these outcomes. This is an important point to make because you think that having the employees be involved in the appraisal may the supervisors or the upper echelon of the organization may think this is a bad thing. But it's not that their feedback. It's just being perceived that they are being heard is important here. And so the people who are afraid that the upper echelons who are afraid that the people lower down in the organizational ladder are going to influence the performance appraisal process in negative ways, or that concern is unwarranted. So let's talk about feedback for a second. Employee feedback is largely a function of receptivity to feedback, and the organization's approach or emphasis on feedback. So you have this individual characteristic here, and this kind of cultural thing here. If you're not receptive to feedback, or if you are in an environment where feedback is not appreciative, everyone starts yelling about somebody being a puppet. You can see when I created this GIF or stole this GIF a while ago. If you're not able to receive or understand, or you're not in a system where feedback is important, you're not going to be able to develop over time. And performance appraisal systems or performance management systems are now more and more focused on continuous employee development and feedback. So it's a cyclical process in which employees are motivated to plan for and engage in actions or behaviors that benefit their future employability on a repetitive or ongoing basis. So if you're not receptive to feedback in yearly performance appraisals, you're not going to develop well over time now. So there's a couple key steps in the performance management cycle when providing feedback. So it's important to attend to the feedback, so pay attention to the feedback that you get. You also need to actually process and integrate it into your mental framework. But I think the most important point is here, using the feedback. So this is similar to a problem that we have in training, where someone can learn something in a training course, they can integrate it into the mental framework here, but they don't have opportunities to use it. So here it's more of a function of an individual characteristic that they may or may not use the feedback. But it's also important for the organization to provide them opportunities to use that feedback on the job. What makes for good feedback? I don't know why that's the title of this bullet point. I should change that. But feedback is related to performance. So it is important to provide feedback to your employees. The only characteristic here, I guess, that makes it, oh yeah, now I remember why this is here. So basically, when you're providing feedback, it should focus on the task, not the person. So when you're criticizing or providing some sort of critiques on somebody's performance, it should focus on how there were task failures and how they can improve on that task, right? You should never attack the person. So you're not saying that you're lazy or that their effort was low. It's just that the outcome was XYZ, and the process that led to it, here's where there were some failings, like something was not turned in on time, or you didn't attend, or your attendance at meetings was low. Sometimes it's hard, but you're kind of, and it actually may be a characteristic of that person, but it's always important to focus on the particular task and the behaviors, not the personality characteristics. So another important characteristic for feedback to be effective is the overall environment. And so the environmental effects concern things like source credibility, like who's it coming from, and how the organization proceeds, how credible this source is, feedback quality, feedback delivery, and other dimensions. And if you have sort of this good, open, organizational culture that values feedback, you're also going to have satisfaction with and motivation to use that feedback, interest in these help-seeking or feedback-seeking behaviors, higher levels of organizational commitment, and more organizational citizenship behaviors, which are all great.
The individual's overall feedback orientation is going to play an important role here.
I'll see you later.
Right? That is, if they generally don't like feedback, or they're not going to be receptive to it, you're going to have a really bad time. And so their feedback orientation includes things like the perception of how useful the feedback is. Is there going to be any accountability for the feedback that you're providing me? Um, the social awareness through feedback and um, their self-efficacy in dealing with feedback. If it's not going to work if people are going to be devastated every single time that they're critiqued. And so their feedback orientation is also related to other sort of characteristics, such as their learning goal orientation. People with higher learning goal orientation value learning above all else. They're not super concerned with
We've traveled far and
whether
wide,
they
but we're
perform well or
finally
not.
here.
Learning is what they're striving for.
All
Hence, it
right,
makes sense that they would be
goodbye. I
more
will be.
receptive and open to feedback.
Before we begin, let me get prepared.
So, lastly, we're going to touch on some legal issues. In the United States, it's illegal to discriminate in performance appraisals based upon non-performance related factors such as age, gender, race, ethnicity, religion, and disability, which is kind of like a duh thing, but people do have these biases. So some legal recommendations in order to help avoid these biases was provided by Austin in 1995, and it's still pretty relevant today, I think. So start with a job analysis to develop the criteria, communicate performance standards in writing, recognize separate dimensions of performance rather than one overall rating, which we talked about earlier. Use both objective and subjective criteria, which we also talked about earlier. Give employees access to appeal, which we haven't talked about much, but you can see this in what we were talking about earlier about voice, or being involved or having participation in the performance appraisal system. Use multiple raters rather than one. We've talked about why we want to do that, right? You have multiple raters, you have their biases potentially cancel each other out, and you have potentially more accurate witnesses to employees' performance, and you document everything pertinent to personnel decisions. That's very important here, so why you're making these decisions. We've talked about how rater training is really necessary, and if you can't give them training, you need very, very clear instructions on how to conduct a performance appraisal. So does this actually happen? Well, these folks here, Werner and Bolino, anywho, looked at court decisions for this 15-year period. Of the 300 court decision or appeal decisions that they reviewed, 109 related to age, 102 to race, and 50 to sex. And what they generally found is that when organizations followed these recommendations, the judgment was more likely made for the defendant. When they didn't use these decisions, then the employees usually won the case. And I think that's about it. Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed that lecture. Nothing really special about this due date thing except for BAM! BAM! Wait, no, BAM! BAM, BAM, BAM! Alright. So the discussion questions, again, are due on the 29th. Please submit those on time. Everyone needs to be in class on February 3rd, so please come to class that day, and there'll be, remember, participation grades and everything. You'll be voting, and that counts for your participation grade, so be sure to be there. And then, again, chapters 3, 4, and 5 are due on the 3rd as well, 11:59 p.m., so please do that. Hope you're having a good one, and see you soon.